need to know. The classical, like Thomist philosophers will say that God is being itself. God is just being. What the hell does it mean to say that being doesn't exist? What does that even mean? It's like a contradiction.
Because the idea of a judgmental God, a punishing God, a God that is scowling and looking down on us and keeping little marks of what we've done wrong, and that if someone sins or errs, they're going to be cast out or punished or smited or sent to hell or something like that, becomes preposterous.
If people don't understand that so much of what they believe is actually a result of how integrating those beliefs makes you behave and makes you feel, if people think that they're acting purely rationally, that every single decision they make about their worldview and their opinions about the world are purely sort of analytical, syllogistic reasoning, then I think they're either telling the truth, in which case they're missing something incredibly important about the human experience, or they don't realize just how much their emotional states are creeping into their rational thought.
You are infamously began your career on the internet as a new atheist firebrand, kind of the youngest of the lot. And at the same time, you seem to have a almost religious fervor for the Bible and Christianity. What is it that obsesses you about the Bible and the Christian mythology?
The Christians will tell you it's the Christian equivalent of what the Muslims call fitra, the sort of inherent desire or drive that a person is born with towards God, and that I'm being sort of whispered to and through the scripture. I don't think it's that, partly because I'm so critical of the text. It is the only ancient text with which I have enough familiarity to talk about meaningfully. Some people get obsessed with the Odyssey or the Metamorphoses or something. And I think part of the interest is, can we be sure that Homer wrote this? You know, can we figure out why? Can we figure out how people interpreted the story at the time? Did the Greeks really believe in the existence of their gods? These are interesting questions, but questions that I don't really have anything to say about because I don't know their stories very well. With the Bible, I spent so long in the new atheist school of thinking that religion is harmful and definitely untrue that I learned a thing or two about the Bible.
But even, I would say, more than that, you studied theology.
That's true.
So that's taking a big step other than becoming vaguely familiar with the Gospels.
But, you know, like there's a level to which when you are in the new atheist sort of firebrand spirit, you think, okay, I'm going to learn about this religion because I want to have better discussions and better debates. And then something shifts and I'm like, look, it's so simplistic to say religion is bad. I think saying religion is bad is like saying politics is bad. Kind of makes sense. And you could make some case. You could give some grand speech saying politics, it drives families apart. And can you name one war that wasn't caused by politics? It's so terrible. And that's kind of true, but it seems trivially true. And it doesn't mean that there isn't a correct political position. And it doesn't mean that you should abstain from doing politics.
Or that humanity needs politics to a certain level, to a certain degree. We have to govern and we have to find discourse and ways to legislate.
So I think it's pretty naive. And then I'm left in a position where I no longer think I can make this surface level simplistic firebrand atheist case, but I also am now just really interested in the Gospels. Because once you've spent so long learning about this kind of stuff, when somebody comes along and says, hey, have you ever noticed this about the text? It just is interesting to me because this is something that I've known about for years, and here's something new that I'm discovering. So I just fell into this, I don't know, the only way I can describe it is a bit like how people get interested in all kinds of texts. People have their favorite play or something like that.
I'm going to push back a little bit. I find that a little disingenuous that you're saying the reason I'm interested in the Gospels is it's the thing I'm the most familiar with. I could be familiar with the work of,
in fairness, there aren't like
Zarathustra or the Epic of Gilgamesh or something, but
there aren't world religions that have sprung up that are as relevant to the people I interact with today around something like the.
So there's a certain level of relevance to it as well,
because also I do philosophy more broadly. I talk about ethics. I talk about free will. I talk about all of this kind of stuff, and in doing that, people always come to the table with religion. It always comes up. You're talking about the big questions with people. Around half of them are probably going to be religious, and some of them are going to be Christian. And I just find these conversations so interesting.
It's fascinating talking about this with you. Really, I'm truly fascinated, and I love getting a non-Christian's perspective on the gospel, because I try and dive in occasionally on my own and understand it, and it's so difficult to separate it from canon.
Yeah, and please take my words with a pinch of salt.
Sure.
Your listeners should, like, if I've said something that's an egregious error, don't blame Rainn. I'm just a guy. I'm just an atheist.
We're having a conversation. What do I know? I'm just a stupid sitcom actor. But I did want to pick your brain about atheism. And I know right now I would call you kind of a spiritual atheist. Is such a thing possible? Can one be a spiritual atheist?
Sure.
How would that work?
I'm never quite sure what someone means by spiritual. Like, do you mean like has a spirit or believes that?
An atheist that incorporates kind of transcendent emotions into a larger kind of heart-based compassion.
I would say
into their belief structure and way of living.
I leave room for it. I don't believe in anything transcendent of the material, but I haven't like ruled it out, and I'm not a materialist in the sense of saying there is only the material.
Are you now considering yourself an agnostic?
Yeah, I think that's
is that a cop out? A lot of people would say, like, Sebastian Junger came on the show and he's like, it's a bullshit cop out. You're either an atheist or you're a theist. Of course there's an agnostic. We can't know anything. We can't know any truth. What do you think?
Cognitive science has shown for decades that belief isn't purely rational. Daniel Kahneman's work on System 1 and System 2, thinking proves that most decisions start with fast, emotional instincts, and then we rationalize them afterward. Religious faith works the same way. It appeals to feelings of comfort and belonging. Neuroscience studies even show that prayer and worship activate the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine, which reinforces belief whether or not it's true. History backs this up too. Christianity itself absorbed myths and customs from earlier religions. Christmas falls near the Roman festival of Saturnalia, and the story of a dying and rising savior parallels older myths like Osiris and Mithras. Even within the Bible, contradictions reveal human authors, not divine truth. The Gospels can't agree on Jesus' genealogy, Matthew 1 versus Luke 3. Luke 3, or what happened at the resurrection. So Alex is right. Our worldviews aren't cold logic. They're shaped by emotional and cultural forces. That's why Christianity spread, not because it proved God exists, but because it resonated with human psychology and borrowed from traditions that came before. Once you see that, it's clear belief is about human needs, not divine truth.
Well, I've heard people say that, and usually it's an atheist of the type of Christopher Hitchens who wants to say that, agnostics are just atheists without a backbone or something. It's like, okay, man, I still don't know if God exists. Like, that is just true. I don't know. It would be maybe a cop-out if I was intentionally, like, calling myself one just for, like, better PR or something. But if anything, it has the opposite effect, because I get a lot of flack for not being too, firm in a position. As I like to say, I will die on this fence. I think it is the most reasonable position to hold, especially because there are so many levels to agnosticism. It's like, okay, is it that you don't know? Is it that you think that it's unknowable? Because it could be that, like, I'm agnostic about whether it's raining outside, but I believe we could go and find out with a little bit of effort if it's raining outside. But there's a kind of agnosticism which says you can't know, right? So I could be an agnostic in the sense, like, my some random uncle of mine or something who's never really thought about theology would probably say, if I were to ask, like, yeah, I guess I'm an agnostic, I don't know. But that's just because, I haven't looked at the arguments. If I have a look, I'll figure it out. There are others who have studied all of the arguments, still say they're agnostic, but because they think you won't be able to get to an answer, right? And it's a difference saying, I just don't know and I can't know. But there's also an agnosticism that comes about as not knowing what someone's talking about. Do you believe in God? I was like, what do you mean by God? What do you mean by God? Really? It's that annoying Petersonian question, but you need to know. The classical, like, Thomist philosophers will say that God is being itself. God is just being. What the hell does it mean to say that being doesn't exist? What does that even mean? It's like a contradiction. But if you think that God is just being, then you could, as an atheist, be like, yeah, okay, well, I believe that stuff exists, and I guess that makes me a pantheist or something. And it all starts getting muddy and confused.
Sure.
So it's like, okay.
We talked about this before in the limitations of language.
Yeah, it's like ask me Like, define the thing you want to know if I believe in, and ask me if I believe in it, and I will tell you to the best of my ability whether I can or I can't. But if somebody says that agnosticism is just a cop-out, well, I think that's a rhetorical cop-out. I think they're just sort of saying something that's a bit sort of spicy and fun and makes you sound like an edgy atheist, but is actually indicative of either not understanding or purposefully misrepresenting the position of the agnostic.
Now, you said before that you don't believe in anything beyond the material. And in our previous conversation, I described kind of my definition of God as being much more akin to something like beauty or truth or even love. Have you ever been in love?
Yeah.
You've been in love. You've felt deep love for a partner, a romantic partner?
Yeah.
And have you felt it for a family member?
Yeah. I mean, one always wants to say, I think so. Because I imagine that, for example, when you have a child
I feel
for the first
so.
time, and yeah, that's the problem, isn't it?
Okay.
But I can kind of imagine
think that you have felt love, but you don't know that you've felt it on the kind of a level of like having a child or something like that.
That's what I mean. It's like, I'm sure that when you have a child, it
changes the paradigm.
I had a Christian friend who recently had a child and said that having a child made them suddenly understand not the sacrifice of Jesus as sacrificing himself, but the sacrifice of the Father sacrificing his only son. He was like, I've just unlocked this whole new understanding of what it means to love a son that you've
I had a
forgotten.
new understanding of God and the divine when I had a child. I didn't have it. My wife had it, and my wife and my child almost died in childbirth. And it was a horrific story, and it was in the middle of the night and in a hallway in the emergency room in a hospital in Van Nuys, California. It was utter childbirth nightmare that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Everyone survived. It came out great. And I held my son in one of the most profound moments of my life in this hallway at 4 a.m., having him almost die and being brought back from death. And there I was, and I looked him in the eyes, and I felt a kind of love on a level that I had never experienced before. And it made me understand God in a different way, because the idea of a judgmental God, a punishing God, a God that is scowling and looking down on us and keeping little marks of what we've done wrong, and that if someone sins or errs, they're going to be cast out or punished or smited or sent to hell or something like that, becomes preposterous.
Yeah.
Because when you love this child so much, of course there are consequences to behaviors. You know, when my son did some nefarious activities here and there in his teenage years, there were consequences to it, but the love never wavered. And the idea of some kind of like undying punishment from me to this beautiful little creature that had come into the world was beyond the possibility. And then I'm just a unemployed sitcom actor with a mediocre podcast. What do I know? Let alone the divine being, Father, creator of love itself. How much love, how much intimacy, closeness, and light does this, this essence hold us all? The idea of like some kind of punishment or smiting then just becomes ludicrous. So it did, for me, shift my perspective of the divine. Does that make sense?
And there are things which experience gives you that you just can't quite put into words. I mean, William James famously tried to sort of analyze what religious experience is, and he comes up with these, I think there are like 4 qualities, and one of the qualities of religious experience is its ineffability, that you cannot put it into words, that you can't explain it. It's something that you literally just can't explain. It's like taking psychedelics, right? If you take psychedelics, and you try to explain what it's like, you can kind of get halfway there, but there is a kind of knowledge that consists in experience.
I heard in an interview that you did, and I was listening to a clip of it, and you were talking about like, imagine someone trying to write an essay about the color blue.
Yeah.
You could know a little bit. It could give you some clues into the color blue, but if you'd never seen color before and you grew up in a gray room or you were colorblind or whatever, and all of a sudden you had access to color, seeing the color blue is a very different experience than reading about the color blue.
Yeah, this is a thought experiment called Mary's Room. So you imagine Mary in this room, but you can make it even worse, because you can say, imagine that Mary in this black and white room that she's born in has access to everything that ever even could be written or uncovered or understood about the color blue. All the science that we yet to discover, all the color theory, everything that could even be known. She has it all written down. She studies it all. And then she steps outside and she sees something blue. The question is, does she learn something? And it seems like the answer is yes. And if that's the case, then there is a kind of knowledge that consists in experience.
When Alex says he'll die on the fence as an agnostic, he's actually pointing to one of the strongest philosophical positions. We don't know, and maybe we can't know. Even Thomas Huxley, who coined the term agnostic in the 19th century, argued that intellectual honesty requires admitting limits to human knowledge. Science supports this. The Mary's Room thought experiment in philosophy of mind shows that no matter how much you know about an experience, you can't fully understand it without living it. That doesn't mean the supernatural is real. It just means human brains process knowledge differently when tied to emotion and perception, and religious experiences don't prove a God. Neuroscience shows that love, awe, and mystical states all arise from brain activity. Experiments with psychedelics like psilocybin reliably trigger feelings of unity, transcendence, or divine presence, the same sensations people attribute to God. In fact, Andrew Newberg's brain scans of praying nuns and meditating monks revealed predictable neurological patterns, not evidence of heaven. Even the Bible contradicts the idea of an all-loving God revealed through experience. Exodus 34:7 describes God punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Compare that to Jesus' teaching of unconditional forgiveness, and you see human authors projecting different experiences of love, fear, and control, not a consistent divine truth.
That is best.
And love is like that.
And that points us to love, because I think that love is the greatest kind of analogy to God. And you said, I don't believe in anything kind of transcendent beyond the material. Do you believe that love is merely kind of neurons and endorphins in the brain, united with some kind of DNA kind of like impetus towards propagation of the species?
Now, that's a genuine mystery, because I think that's tied up to the question of consciousness more broadly. I don't have any problem saying that the experience of love is something like a feeling. It's something that you very strongly feel. And so if you're going to be a materialist about consciousness in general, you can say that love is just one of those feelings that is neurons in the brain. But not specific to love, just specific to feeling anything. I find it very strange to say that not that the feeling of love or the seeing of blue is correlated with brain activity, but that is the brain activity. That love is the same thing as the neurons firing in my brain when I feel love. I'm not interested in what the brain's doing. I'm interested in the experience that correlates with that brain activity. You know, if the experience of seeing blue is just neurons firing in my brain, if that's what blue is, I should be able to cut open your brain and find blue in there somewhere, but you can't. There's something called blue, this experience that you have, which goes alongside the brain activity, but is not the same thing as it. That is the greatest mystery for materialists to explain, which is why I'm agnostic. That's why I say I leave room for this. I don't say I'm a materialist. The biggest challenge for that is consciousness.
Well, one of the biggest disservices that atheists, I feel, do to themselves and to their cause, because atheists can be extremely evangelical, is this idea that consciousness is an illusion. You know, it's the Daniel Dennett kind of thing. Like we're getting all of these inputs, and our brain makes them become a totality of experience, but it's all illusory, including emotion. And that free will is also an illusion, but that, you know, between our DNA and between our neurons firing and our background and our B.F. Skinner kind of behavioralist way that we've grown up in our culture, you know, any choice that we're seeming to make has actually been pre-wired into our cognition. But if atheists hold to consciousness is an illusion and there's no such thing as free will, you're not going to gain a lot of converts. Because if you go to a random house over here in Thousand Oaks, California.
Have you heard the bad news?
Like, hey, by the way, guys, your experience of being a human being, memories and growing up and falling in love and breaking your leg and losing your uncle and seeing the the Mona Lisa for the first time. By the way, that's all an illusion.
Yeah.
And in fact, you didn't even really experience that. And you didn't even choose to go to Italy and go see the Mona Lisa. That was all chosen for you in a variety of different ways. You're not really doing yourselves any favor by gaining people over to the atheist bandwagon.
The few issues I'd have to raise to that, though, are firstly that truth doesn't have to be palatable, right? If it is actually the case, you might not have many converts to it, but if it is the case, then it just is the case. Also, some people will say that
Christians would say the same thing.
That's true, but that's the thing.
Burning in hell may not be palatable,
but
it doesn't convert people,
right? Exactly.
But it's true.
And so I think, the kind of atheist materialists you're talking about would say the same thing. Technically speaking, you don't have to be a materialist to be an atheist, because atheism is being without God.
Yep.
You could believe that there's an immaterial existence. You could believe in mind-body dualism, but not believe that there's a God, for example. That's another important thing to spell out. But yeah, I mean, the idea that consciousness is an illusion, I think, is pretty confused. Having said that, I haven't thought about this as much as Daniel Dennett has, so I have to temper my words. But I really think that that's almost a contradiction in terms. There's also another sort of element that's missing from this picture. We talk about there only being the material, or there being the material, but also this like mind stuff, this immaterial thing. There's also a position that there's only the mind stuff and that the material doesn't exist.
Oh, that's good. I know my friend Stephen Phelps is out there watching, and he's all in favor of that.
Yeah.
Right? You lit up like a Christmas tree. He's so happy right now.
So they call it idealism, at least in one of its forms.
Okay, I hadn't heard of that.
So it's kind of mysterious how materialists account for consciousness, but they say, like, in some way, the conscious experience is just emergent of material properties. And the idealist says that the material world is emergent of a mind. So George Berkeley is sort of the classic philosopher to think about here. He starts by sort of asking the reader to be like, it's impossible to separate the thing from your idea of the thing, right? Like if you try to imagine a tree that's just on its own somewhere in a forest, you've got the concept in your mind. The thing that's in your mind is the concept of the tree. It's not you don't have a material tree in your mind. It's the concept. And like your sense experience, you're only seeing a representation of what's in front of you.
Is that kind of like Plato's forms, like the ideal form?
Plato is sort of abstracting from objects to understand why this is a cup and that's also a cup. What is it they have in common? They're far apart from each other. They're different colors. They're different shapes. What is it they have in common? Well, they both share in this abstract thing called a form. That's a whole other thing, which I also think kind of maybe points to consciousness, but that's really interesting. But no, Berkeley is talking about you can't think of a thing without thinking of the thing, right? Nothing exists except insofar as it's being thought about. Now, I think there are so many holes to poke in this, but this is Berkeley's position. So he's like, when you see a table, you're just seeing your mind's representation of the table. You don't see the table directly. Same thing like Kant points out, you don't have direct access to the table. It's through your experience. Okay, well, the same thing with anything, and the critic says, well, I can conceive of a cup just existing on its own. And Berkeley's like, yeah, but you're conceiving of it. And so what you're imagining is a thought. So here comes the objection to this position. Aha, okay, well, Mr. Berkeley, if I have a candle and I light the candle and I look at it and then I leave the room and I don't think about it, no one's thinking about the candle, and yet I come back and the candle has melted. There must have been a time in between where the candle existed, but no one was thinking about it. So it existed separate from thought. And Berkeley says, I still think that things only exist insofar as they're being thought about. But what you've just proven is that there is always some kind of mind thinking about everything all at once.
Ooh.
And that's what God is for George Berkeley.
Interesting.
So Berkeley thinks that God exists and the entire material universe is like a thought of God, which is kind of interesting. The Plato's form thing is interesting because there is this great mystery. Why is this a cup? Why is that a cup? Why is this a table and this not a table? It's actually a really difficult question to answer.
When people say love proves God, they're confusing emotion with evidence. Neuroscience is clear. Love is a product of brain chemistry. Oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin drive bonding between partners, parents, and children. These chemicals evolved to help humans survive and pass on their genes, not to reveal the divine. The fact that we feel love so powerfully doesn't mean it comes from outside the material. It means our brains are wired for it. Consciousness is often called the hard problem, but that mystery doesn't point to God either. Philosophers like Daniel Dennett and Patricia Churchland argue that consciousness emerges from complex neural networks, just like flight emerges from wings. We don't need a supernatural soul to explain experience. And history shows that claims about consciousness as proof of God shift with time. Augustine said it was the soul. Descartes said it was dualism. Today, neuroscience shows its electrochemical activity. Each step shrinks the role of God. Even Berkeley's idea that the universe only exists because God is thinking it falls apart. Physics shows the universe operated for billions of years before humans, or any minds, were here to perceive it. Cosmic background radiation, fossil records, and planetary evolution all prove that matter existed long before thought. So love, consciousness, and philosophy don't point to God. They point to the complexity of the human brain. The beauty of agnosticism and atheism is that it allows us to admit what we don't yet know without inventing a supernatural answer. What do you think? Does love prove God? Or is it just chemistry and evolution? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this gave you perspective, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into philosophy, science, and belief.